If there's one thing that the My Hero Academia world fails to accomplish, it's showing the compatibility of quirks with different individual people. Now, we've all obviously seen quirks such as explosions being gifted to somebody like Bakugo, hardening gifted to somebody like Kirishima, who's made perfect use of his quirk, but we have never seen something like Aoyama. He's pretty much the only case in the story where the quirk does not actually fit his body, where the quirk can actually destroy him from the inside out. And today I decided that I would cover a similar concept. What if we gave Izuku, with his weird personality and crybaby attitude, a quirk that is just so unlike him, and see how he would fare in the world without One for All and with a rage quirk? That said, though, ladies and gentlemen, if you guys go on to enjoy today's video, then definitely make sure to slap up that like button and let me know what your favorite part was. That said, enjoy.
Hey Ross, sauce it up.
We start our story off in the perspective of a young Izuku inside of the Quirk doctor's office. We would hear the words come out of the doctor's mouth telling Izuku that he's sorry, kid, but he's not going to be having a quirk anytime soon. And we zoom in on a face of Izuku just looking like his entire world was just shattered into pieces in front of him. Izuku would turn up to look at his mom, who would simply say she's sorry. As Izuku, as at this moment, would begin feeling so many emotions, he doesn't know what to do with them. He feels sadness, he feels like a failure, he feels like he'll never amount to anything because he doesn't have a quirk. All the kids had already started bullying him because of that, and Izuku just feels scared. There's not an ounce of anger or rage or hatred inside of him because that's just not who Izuku is. And so for the following next couple of years, Izuku would have to sit and live a normal life, thinking to himself all this time that he has no quirk. And you all might be wondering, how come the doctors weren't able to decipher that Izuku actually does have a quirk? Well, that's a little bit of a tricky scenario because the way that I want Izuku's quirk to work is this. Now, obviously, we all know that there exists such thing as energy. There is such thing as kinetic energy. However, I wanted to mess around with the concept of negative energy, right? And negative energy is going to be not negative feelings, but angry feelings, like feelings of anger, feelings of hatred, feelings of revenge, things like that, not sadness, because while that might be negative, it's not exactly the kind I need, right? But the concept of Izuku's quirk is pretty much kind of going to be like Spartan Rage. When Izuku just lets loose, lets his primal instincts take over the wheel, lets that energy fuel his body and give him strength unrivaled to no other, give him speed incomprehensible, and give him the ability to pretty much tank attacks because of the rage and adrenaline that will pump through his system. Give him the ability to release that energy inside of him in energy like beams that are just red in color. And I just think that it's such a cool idea for a quirk that not a lot of people have thought of. Using rage as a quirk, it's just awesome to me. Like, obviously we've seen different concepts being used, but rage in the My Hero Academia community, not quite yet. So I figured I'd be the first one to explore this concept. That said though, what we're going to be having happen from here on out is essentially Izuku living his normal life. Nothing would change, everything would stay the status quo until finally we get to the day where Izuku and Bakugo would have found themselves in the classroom. Bakugo would have just told everybody that he's going to be going to the national school, that he's going to become the greatest hero, he's going to become #1, the richest hero in the world. And finally, the teacher would look towards the direction of the paper and say, "Oh, Izuku, you also want to go to the national school?" As Izuku would hide himself in between his books and stuff, and Bakugo would just have his entire moment ruined by a quirkless nobody. Bakugo immediately turns to the direction of Deku as he would say, Deku, what are you doing trying to get into the national schools? Are you trying to get killed? You know you wouldn't last a day out there with the pros. You wouldn't last a day out there with people like me, Izuku. It's not all fun and games once you get to the nationals. And Izuku begins to pretty much fumble and shake all over the place and just be like, no, Bakugo, you got it all wrong. It's always been my dream, you know? And from here, Izuku would pretty much look to Bakugo as he could just see this stare of just anger, right? And Bakugo would then go on to pretty much just not say anything for class. Finally, when the class is over and Deku would be packing his stuff up for the end of the day, Bakugo would walk in the classroom with his goons. And from here, he would go on to slam his hand on the desk with an explosion as he goes on to tell Izuku to not even try for the national schools, telling him that if he's smart, he'll pull out. It's at this moment that Izuku would begin to get a little angry, because in this moment, he would think back to all the times that Bakugo's bullied him. And he would want to say something, but he remembers the one time he had, and Bakugo just pummeled him. Deku felt so much fear at that moment. And because Izuku's not too prone to rage, that wasn't a feeling that went up to the surface. But now, Izuku's tired. Izuku's thinking that he's so angry with Bakugo. Why does he never leave him alone? Why can't he just go on and live his own dream and let Deku live his own? He might not make it to the big hero school, but at least he'll try. And there's nothing wrong with that. And Bakugo would just be thinking to himself that that there's no way that this loser will be making it into the hero school. That, somebody like Deku could never amount to anything, because he doesn't have a quirk, right? And so from here, Bakugo would tell Izuku, look, Deku, look, how about this? I know of one way you can get into the hero schools. If you just go to the top of the roof and take a swan dive off the roof, you can maybe be born with a quirk in your next life. But for now, you gotta leave it up to people like me, who will go on to actually become #1 heroes. Not like you, as he rips the book away from Deku's hand and blows it up in front of him. And from here, he throws it at Deku and would proceed to walk away, as Deku would give him that same stare that we would get in the original, with Izuku this time around, once Bakugo turns to him, continuing that stare of just anger. And Bakugo would say, you want to stand up for yourself again, Deku? You know how it went the last time, don't you? As Izuku stands up and says, I know, Bakugo. From here, he clenches up both fists, looks down to the ground and thinks to himself that he needs to stand up for himself, that he's done being Bakugo's punching bag. And from here, Izuku's eyes would glow a strange red as Bakugo would say, what the? And from here, Izuku blitzes at him in speeds that Bakugo was not expecting for a quirkless nobody. Izuku would punch Bakugo straight through the wall of the classroom, as both of Bakugo's goons would run immediately, and Bakugo would come crashing in from the same hole, with explosions launching one straight at Deku. But Deku would dodge it, as immediately he would turn to Bakugo and throw a mean kick at the direction of Bakugo, and would follow that up by rushing at him, grabbing Bakugo by the hair mid-air and smashing it into his knee, as Bakugo would be coughing out like blood, and he would be thinking to himself like, what's going on? But it's at this moment that Izuku would say, I'm done being your punching bag, in a strange ominous tone, as Bakugo would say, you're a villain. And from here, Izuku would pretty much end up grabbing Bakugo and throwing him out of the classroom, right? As, he begins walking closer and closer to Bakugo, and slowly he can feel that power that he has inside of him dwindle away as he looks to Bakugo and sees that he's scared. From here, he would calm down and Bakugo would stay on the ground, just passing out into unconsciousness, as the nurse would get both boys and take them to the recovery room, and from here, both parents would be called up to the office. This means that Deku and Bakugo won't have their encounter with the sludge villain, and so Mirio this time around will actually be the one to inherit One for All, just like he should have in the original. Now, what we're going to be having happen here is that once both parents make it into the classroom and they see each respectable son, they would both immediately look to each other and be like, what was your son thinking? Like, he could have hurt my son, you know what I mean? And Inko would just say that this is nothing, that Izuku has been coming home injured for years, showing the scars all over Deku's body, and saying that for years Mitsuki hasn't been doing anything to control her son, that Izuku's been getting pummeled for years, and that Bakugo getting beat up one time was nothing in the grand scheme of things. The teacher would look towards the direction of Inko and say, "I'm sorry, man, but unfortunately, I can't exactly have your son beating down on one of the next top 10 heroes at least. We're gonna have to expel your son." And Mitsuki would just look towards the direction of Inko with a cocky smile as Bakugo would grin at Deku and just kind of be happy that Deku's gonna get expelled and that nobody, except for his goonies, are probably gonna know what happened. But Bakugo can just always lie to them and tell them that, he did win the battle and that Izuku was just another nobody, that it was just a fluke, right? But unfortunately for Bakugo, we're not going to be having that happen anytime soon because when Izuku hears of this, he would just get angry, thinking to himself that there's no way that after all the time that Bakugo had beaten him down, they were willing to turn a blind eye. But when it came to him, nobody cared. Nobody gave him a single moment to even give him attention. Nobody ever asked him if he was okay. It was always just, "Bakugo, get away from him. You don't want to damage your record. Never leave him alone. He's quirkless. He can't defend himself." But the second that one of the people that actually has strength would get hurt, you guys would be willing to expel me? What have I done wrong? I beat him up one time? Seriously? What about the hundreds of times that he's beaten me up? And I was the one scared, and I ended up in the infirmary. You guys covered that up. You're the worst school ever, and I'm glad I got expelled from here. I never want to return. As Izuku's eyes would glow an ominous red, and he would walk out of the door. Following this, Izuku would make his way home with his mom and not say a single word in the car. Inko would be thinking to herself that she simply just needs to give Izuku some space. After all, he did just discover that he had a quirk, and he used that quirk to harm one of his old childhood friends. I mean, she knows that there's been definitely some bad blood between them for a while, but she never expected this. I mean, obviously Izuku has come home beaten and bruised a couple of times, but that's just boys being boys, right? That's what Inko's been thinking. But anyways, Izuku would get home and go to his room just like all of us have at some point or another, and he would proceed to essentially slam the door to his room as he would sit down and just kind of contemplate what happened. On one hand, he's happy at the fact that he just unlocked his quirk, and on the other, he's worried because it didn't feel like him for a second. When he was angry, it almost felt like an entire different entity took over the wheel and didn't let Izuku be the one who was in control, if that makes sense. It almost felt like Izuku just took a back step of the wheel and somebody else did something for him, you know what I mean? But Izuku decides that he's not going to dwell on that and just dwell on the fact that he has a quirk. So slowly but surely, things would get better and Izuku would finally calm down. Inko would eventually enter the room with a plate of food that Izuku likes. As she knocks and Izuku opens the door to her. She says, "Are you hungry, Izuku?" And Izuku would just say, "Yeah, mom." He goes out to dinner and they pretty much act like nothing happens. Izuku from here would have to be gone from school for about a week until Inko would be able to enroll him into another school, and he would finish the next couple of months of school somewhere else, getting the credits that he need and still training for the UA entrance exam. Because now Deku does have to train with his quirk. Deku is kind of afraid of his quirk, but at least he has a quirk, is all that Deku would be thinking. And that's actually something that Izuku and his mother have actually talked about quite frequently. Obviously, Inko has been wanting to know things, so they did end up taking Izuku to the quirk doctor, and this is where they would determine that Izuku did have a quirk all along. It's a quirk called Rage, or Spartan's Rage, where pretty much what his quirk is going to do is make it so that Izuku gets so much stronger. The negative energy that he absorbs into himself when he's angry is something that can be transformed into power. His anger can be channeled into energy blast, which is something Izuku still hasn't discovered, but the doctor did, and it can actually impact his physical stats. So that is exactly what Izuku has, going for him. But the negative side is that if he stores too much anger inside and doesn't like release it, then it's gonna corrupt him. Like the longer he uses the power, the more it like gains control, right? And the angrier he is, the stronger he is, the harder it is for Izuku to control. And that's pretty much what the downside is. Also, another minor downside would pretty much just be that if Izuku isn't mad, he obviously can't use his quirk. And he's not going to go around being mad all the time, because that's just not who Izuku is. That's not who, Midoriya is all of his life. He's been raised as a good kid. And I'm not saying that, Bakugo's bad, but I'm definitely saying that, Deku's a good apple and Bakugo's more along the middle, right? But anyways, Izuku decides that because of this, he's going to be needing to get into meditation and stuff like that. And so Izuku would get enrolled into like boxing classes to pretty much work on his physical stats, and he would work on his physical training via using a gym, because he never has the idea brought up to him by All Might. He looks up some training regimen on YouTube. First, he starts where all of us started, something that I'm sure all of us have looked up once or twice: how to get abs fast. and Izuku just proceeds to essentially start doing crunches and stuff like that, but it doesn't work, right? And from here, Izuku's just like, all right, well, that doesn't work, so let me just try to get strength, right? So he decides to bulk. And Izuku does indeed bulk. I mean, the dude ends up packing about 25 pounds of lean muscle in 10, actually that's a little unrealistic, 15 pounds of lean muscle in the 10 months that he has. And he pretty much gets to the same physical strength level that he would be by the time that All Might had finished his training. However, this time around, Izuku also would have been working on his fighting skills and stuff like that via boxing, so that he could actually, have a little bit of technique and stuff like that. He would also learn how to grapple a bit here and there, and he would learn how to kick via kickboxing, because that was something that Izuku also learned how to do. So Izuku was a little bit of a mixed fighter, but he wasn't too good at any of it. He was mainly good at boxing. He was average at kickboxing, and he was very, very mid at grappling. But hey, he has these things under his belt, and the longer that he works on them, the more skilled he's going to get and talented in all of these fields that Izuku is going to be working on, right? Eventually, the 10 months would be over, and Izuku would, at this point, kind of understand his quirk. Now, he doesn't exactly understand it 100%, but he does know that he needs to get angry. So whenever Izuku is about to use his quirk, he has to think of something negative. He has to start getting angry. And the thing with that is that Izuku kind of has a little bit of a hard time getting angry, but he started to kind of get the hang of it and started to kind of think about one memory that always is sure to get him angry: how he got expelled and Bakugo never got in trouble. That's something that always irks Izuku and would definitely give him a bit of power. More things would be if he thought about how people treated him in his childhood. That gets him angry. Another thing that could get him angry is how his mother didn't believe he could become a hero without a quirk. That gets him angry. All of these things together are things that Izuku thinks about, and that's pretty much how he has been training his quirk. He has learned how to shoot miniature, like little energy beams out of his mouth that he can like just blast. And he's definitely begun to get the hang of it, right? And it's pretty good, like it's great, it's awesome. Izuku's been getting the hang of it so much that now he can semi-control it, right? And we're now going to be jumping into what happens after the 10-month training arc, because obviously Izuku only has so much time to learn and not exactly too much time to control it perfectly. But the control that he does have is like low tier control, where like he can control the anger and the rage with like low bursts of anger, like he can't get too mad, because if he gets too mad, then what happened with Bakugo will happen again. And that is something that scares Izuku, because he thinks to himself, what happens if he can't control himself and lashes out against people who are close to him, right? He never wants to hurt somebody the way that he hurt Bakugo, so he tried to train for cases like that. But I guess we'll just have to see when the time comes. Anyways, though, what would happen from here on forward is essentially that Izuku would make his way towards the UA school building, and this time around, he's not going to trip. So he doesn't meet Uraraka early, and they don't have that dumb interaction, but instead he just makes his way towards the inside, where he would see Bakugo, and a little bit of anger would begin to come out to the surface because he just remembers the last time that he saw Bakugo. But not only anger would come, but also like a feeling of guilt. He would feel a strong feeling of guilt because he pummeled Bakugo and he actually made somebody fear him. Deku has been thinking about that moment a lot, and he's pretty upset with himself because he doesn't think that that's something All Might would do. He doesn't think All Might would instill fear into someone who isn't a villain. Obviously, if they're a villain, then yeah, but Izuku can't even call Bakugo a villain. Yeah, he's not nice. He's not a nice kid by any means, but he's not evil. And it's not like he was doing it to anybody else, just him. And it was just him because he was quirkless. So maybe it was his fault. But anyways though, eventually Izuku would go inside of the testing areas and he would begin taking his test. This is boring, so we're going to be skipping this, and we're just immediately going to be jumping to the physical portion of the robot test, right? Izuku at this moment would be waiting outside, and he would be like, oh man, like I'm really towards the back. He's just thinking to himself like, I can't win if I'm towards the back, you know what I mean? So Izuku would just be like, I guess I'll just go to the front. He starts making his way towards the front, and this is when some blue-haired boy would just stop him. Izuku turns and he's like, what's your deal, dude? Like, why are you touching me? And the reason that Izuku would answer like this is because his personality is shifted due to his quirk. Because Izuku knows that he can't be that same person if he's going to be having a quirk like this, right? And, Ida would look at him and say, I know you were going to go talk to that girl. Like, you have to leave her alone. She's trying to focus. And Izuku would say, I wasn't even going to go talk to her. I was just going to go to the front. Leave me alone. As he walks away from Ida, and Ida would be like, oh, like, my apologies. As from here, Izuku makes his way towards the front. He starts like kind of like maneuvering through the people. And once he makes it there, he's just like, okay, so what now? Until suddenly, President Mike would begin to stay over the mic thing. He'd be like, go, go, go. A hero doesn't wait for a signal. They just act. And from here, Izuku would immediately just like watch as everybody around him would begin running towards the area where the robots are. From here, Izuku would decide that he's gonna need to get angry, and Izuku would just stand there thinking to himself, okay. Think about this. And Izuku would be feeling the pressure. Like finally, Izuku's in the moment and he would be faltering. Izuku just looking at these robots and seeing everybody else be so talented around him would begin to kind of make Izuku doubt himself. And this doubt would not be good for Izuku, because with doubt comes other bad things, you know what I mean? Like with doubt, it isn't just doubt, but it's like making it harder for him to control his quirk, making it harder for him to think about bad memories to make him angry. And overall, it's just a complete hindrance to Izuku. And like I'm saying, Izuku would get mad, and he would not mad, but he would just get upset, right? And from here, he would begin to rush in towards the robots. It's this moment that a thought would come by his head, and a little bit of angry energy would pretty much go into him, just enough so Izuku could destroy one robot and get 1 point. It's at this moment that Izuku would be going towards another 3-point robot, and from here, Izuku only has a 1 point, from now. But he's going towards the direction of a 3-pointer when suddenly somebody else comes in and just takes the robot away, right? And it wasn't just nobody, it was Ida. And Izuku just is like, oh my god, it was him again. It starts to irk him. And from here, he's just getting angrier and angrier and angrier, until suddenly Izuku's like, whatever, like I can't keep dealing with this, you know what I mean? I need to find more robots. And he begins to run as fast as he can, looking for more robots, but it seems like everybody else is just taking them from him, you know what I mean? Finally, Izuku would get to a line where there's one robot in front of him, and Izuku, using a bit of his rage, would actually be able to clobber it completely, getting a grand total of 3 robot points, am I right? Until finally, he would continue running and get about 10 points, right? Just getting about 10 robot points of complete like destruction. And President Mike would begin saying that there's only going to be 2 minutes left, right? Telling everybody that they better prepare themselves because it's about to end, right? And it's at this moment that the ground would start rumbling and the 0-pointer would finally make himself known. Izuku, seeing this giant monstrosity, would see as everybody's running away, and fear would begin to overcome Izuku. But at this moment, he would hear the scream of a girl saying, "Help!" As Izuku turns to the direction and sees Uraraka on the ground. Izuku would think to himself that how could all these like so-called next future generation pro heroes call themselves that if they weren't willing to get in the way and save that girl? Like, she's stuck under some rubble. And Izuku, as everybody else is running, he gives like Ida this glare of like, you coward, and he would rush in towards the direction of Uraraka. At this moment, Izuku would just think to himself, I can't think if I can, or if I'm gonna be able to muster enough anger. I just have to. You're not gonna kill her. All Might would immediately think of a vision, or no, Izuku would think of a vision in his head where somebody takes his mom away from him, and like basically just getting angrier and angrier, thinking back to all the times that Bakugo would bully him, as a scene of flashbacks plays on the screen, if this was an anime, mind you. And Izuku just lunges into the air, very, very similar to what we saw in the original, and bam! Straight to the Zero Pointer's face as he sends that Zero Pointer flying miles, or no, not miles, but he would send that Zero Pointer just crashing down back. And at this moment, that rage would still be filled inside of him, so he would land completely fine, grab her Uraraka, and take her towards the direction of Recovery Girl. As Uraraka would want to say thank you, but Izuku just kind of looks a bit scary. And from here, he puts her down and finally calms down. He breathes in. His hair starts to like slowly fall down because it kind of like rises a bit, kind of like Aizawa, and it slowly starts to come down. And Izuku looks to Uraraka and he's like, are you okay? And she's like, yeah, thanks to you. What was that? That was incredible. She begins to pretty much start praising Izuku, and he's like, it was nothing. As from here, Uraraka's like, thank you so much for saving me. And Recovery Girl comes in and goes, all right, everybody out of the way. I gotta treat this girl. And from here, Izuku just watches as Uraraka gets kissed by Recovery Girl, and he would begin to walk away, making his way home until finally a couple of days would pass and Deku would get a knock at the door. At this moment, Izuku would go to answer it, as it would be his mother Inko in front of him, saying, It's here, Izuku, your acceptance letter. Hopefully you get in. As she sits down right next to Izuku, and they would begin to play the video. It would be All Might congratulating Deku for his performance and him telling him that he has made it to his hero academia.